They were, this were
We about that time?
7 o'clock, 7:01 actually.
1900. Good evening. It is 7 o'clock. I'd like to call the meeting of the Stratford Inland and Watercourse Commission to order. Public hearing. Application IWWA 2017-4, construct a restaurant associated parking lot, increasing the impervious area by 12,563 square feet and altering 198 square feet of wetlands and 25,704 square feet of upland review area. Site address 577 Hawley Avenue, Assessor's Reference Map 30.17, Block 3, Lot 73, applicant Par 1 Development LLC, care of James Fitzpatrick. Is the applicant or his representative present?
Good evening, Madam Secretary, Ms. Beto, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. My name is Barry Knott. I'm a lawyer with the firm of Knott & Dunn with offices at 1656 Main Street, Stratford. I'm here this evening on behalf of Par 1 Development LLC of 225 Hawley Lane, Stratford, the principal of which is Jim Fitzpatrick, who sits behind me to my right. I've just handed Bill the certificates of mailing, and I have given each of you a folder of exhibits to which I will be making reference during the course of my presentation. The first 5 of which I'd like to take you through right now just to orient you to the property we are talking about. Exhibit 1 is taken from the exit from the Marriott on Hawley Lane, looking directly at 577 Hawley Lane, which is a one-story residential house located directly across the street from that Marriott exit and entrance. And you can see a little car parked in the driveway in the back, and just to the left of that car, behind those pine trees, is the little house, which is 577 Hawley Lane. Exhibit 2 is another photo of the same house, taken from Hawley Lane. Note, to the right of that house and to the left of that traffic sign, that orange traffic sign, you can see an office building behind the trees. That office building is the medical office building to the left of the entrance to the Big Y Shopping Center, right at Hawley Lane. So that building that you see is the building that, as you go up the driveway into the Big Y Shopping Center, directly on the left, there's a medical office building. That's the office building you see to the left of that orange sign. Exhibit 3 is another photo of the same medical office building, and the Hawley Lane Shopping Center is obviously up that driveway. And to the left, beyond that car that you see on the road, to the left is the house at 577 Hawley Lane. Exhibit 4 is another photo of the house. This is taken from the Marriott exit looking towards Huntington Road. The single-family house is behind those trees on the right. And Exhibit 5 is a photo looking back towards the subject premises, taken from the Huntington Road side, across from the entrance to the Hawley Glen condos. Exhibit 6 is an aerial photo of the area in question, and I've highlighted in red, I've outlined in red the house at 577 Hawley Lane. Actually, that property goes back further than it's shown on this particular photo. Exhibit, and I've circled the locations from which the photographs that I've just shown you were taken. So photograph number 1 was taken where I've got number 1 circled. Photograph number 2 was taken where I've circled 2. 3 was taken where I've circled 3, and 4 was taken where I circled 4. Exhibit 7 is another depiction of the subject premises. And as you can see, this was taken from the Greater Bridgeport Regional Council Geographic Information System map, also known as the Stratford GIS map. And this, the subject premises is outlined in gray. As you can see from this exhibit, The site is located immediately to the north of the medical building. You can see the medical building in light orange, just to the left of the gray area, and is located 2 parcels north of the North Town Center, Big Y. It is located directly across the street from the Marriott Hotel and another medical office building, which you can see just to the left from across the street. Further up Hawley Lane towards Huntington Road are properties owned by the state of Connecticut, which was acquired by eminent domain by the state when Hawley Lane was straightened out approximately 15 years ago. There are 2 condominium developments to the right going towards Huntington Road. One is a small 9-unit condo project, and the other is Hawley Glen, consisting of 40 units. Now, Exhibit 8 is an existing conditions survey of the property that is the subject of this application. And there's, as you can see, there's a single-family house located on this property, which consists of 139,390 square feet, 3.2 acres. This parcel is 3.2 acres in size. There's 224 feet of road frontage on Hawley Lane. The lot extends back 1,168 feet on the southwesterly boundary and 1,350 feet on the northwesterly boundary. And you'll note that this exhibit consists of 2 components. One that is a rectangular box at the top of the page depicting the whole lot, which I've outlined in pink. So that whole lot that you see at the top of this page, that whole area that you see at the top of this page is this property, 3.2 acres. The second component is shown on the bottom half of the page, and that reflects only the area of the lot upon which the existing 1-story wood frame house and lawn are located, and where the proposed development will occur. You will note that I've highlighted in blue a boundary around the potentially developable area of the lot. And I did that both at the top pink area and in the bottom area. This represents the encroachment of inland wetlands onto the site from all directions. Because of this wetland encroachment, the developable area of this lot is limited to the first few hundred feet back from Hawley Lane. In other words, the first few hundred feet back from Hawley Lane is upland. Beyond that, it's wetlands. Approximately 50% of the 3.2 acre site is wetlands. Approximately 50%. Now, you will notice from this Exhibit 8 that the lawn area surrounding the existing residential home extends significantly beyond the wetlands line. I want to reference Exhibit 9, which is a letter to the current owner of the property, Mr. Sedlak, from the Connecticut DEP in October of 1981, in which the DEP approved Mrs. Sedlak's application to, quote, maintain fill materials within inland wetlands for the lawn and garden areas associated with the residential property located at 577 Hawley Lane. If you look at the second page of this exhibit, you'll see I've highlighted in yellow the language of approval that the DEP granted in 1981. Essentially, she was looking for permission from DEP to fill in the wetlands to the rear of her house so that she could create a lawn and garden area back there. And that lawn and garden area is shown on the existing conditions survey to the right of the blue line. This approval is significant, is significant because it indicates that Mrs. Sedlak obtained permission to fill in the area of her lawn and garden back in '81 and has maintained that lawn and garden ever since. As you will see shortly from the testimony of our civil engineer, Christy Angelis, a component of my client's application is to restore a significant portion of the previously filled-in inland wetland area. Now, in January of 2017, the Zoning Commission changed the zoning designation of this property from RS3 single-family residential to CF limited business. CF is considered a limited business zone because the permitted uses in that area, in that zone, are very limited, and all uses in that zone require special case approval after a public hearing from the Zoning Commission. A copy of the Zoning Commission zone change approval letter was attached to our wetlands application. It's already in your packet, attached to the application we submitted. No application by us has been submitted to the Zoning Commission as yet, pending the outcome of tonight's application. Now, Exhibit 10 is the site plan showing the proposed development of the upland area of this lot as a restaurant. And as you can see from this site plan, what is proposed is a 2,250 square foot restaurant with associated parking areas, wetland remediation, et cetera. And I won't get into the details of this plan. However, I will introduce Chris DeAngelis of Cabezas DeAngelis Engineers and Surveyors, who will take you through this site plan. Chris?
Good evening. My name is Chris DeAngelis, professional engineer at Cabezas DeAngelis. Our office is in Bridgeport. What you see in front of you is our survey that we performed for the site. It's the existing condition survey. And this, at the top here, you can see the entire 3.2 acre parcel that that Attorney Knott was referring to. And then here in the center of the sheet, you can see the 1 acre at the front of the site that really constitutes the development, the disturbed area. And what I've highlighted there in yellow and in this pink color are the two important lines. The pink color here being the limits of wetlands as flagged by Mr. George Logan from REMA Ecological Services, who is here tonight. And what I've highlighted with the yellow is the limits of the fill that was placed per the 1981 DEP permit. And that's basically the edge of the lawn area. If you've been to the site, you'll see that there's a very clear distinction where the lawn ends and where, like, let's call it the natural wetlands begins. And so we surveyed that so we would know very accurately about what that area is. And the area in between that is that 6,550 plus or minus of area that we're calling previously allowed fill. The remainder of the site all falls within your upland review area. So basically, everything that we're doing falls under your purview as the Wetlands Commission for the town of Stratford. The house in the center of the site is approximately 27, it's a ranch-style house, so it has a large footprint. It's 2,700 square feet. And then there is a driveway that wraps around the southern side of the house. Currently, there's no stormwater management. Water flows over the lawn directly into the wetlands overland flow. The lawn, which is basically the wetlands area, is routinely mowed and maintained as a residential lawn would be. This is the site plan for the project. It shows the new building constructed up by Folly Lane. Interestingly enough, the new building is slightly smaller than the existing house, but with commercial development, of course, comes parking area. So we've provided a parking lot for 38 vehicles, which is per your zoning regulations. And we've actually pulled that edge of the disturbed area further from the wetlands. So because we are trying to maintain a grade for the parking lot, we have a very low retaining wall, about 2.5 feet high. And that provides a very clear cutoff of our development so that we don't have the prospect of future encroachments, in some way. So there'll be an actual grade change difference between our parking lot and the existing ground. And we're actually pulling this back. You can see this green area here is the existing fill or encroachment into the wetlands, and you can see how much we're pulling that back. So we're creating somewhat of a buffer area now between the developed part of the site and the natural wetlands. So that area, this green area that you see, is one of our restoration areas. We have two areas, two types of mitigation. We have restoration areas, and then we actually have one area of new wetlands. They're both shown on the site. The green area is restorations of areas that were previously filled. The yellow restoration involving removal of Phragmites and invasive species. And then there's one area in this corner where we're actually creating some new wetlands by getting rid of some fill that was dumped there over the years. Mr. Logan will discuss all that in much more detail. That's his area of expertise. As far as the site development, it's pretty straightforward. We've aligned the driveway entrance with the entrance to the hotel across the street, so that cars, the idea is someone's staying at the hotel, they want a nicer breakfast maybe than the hotel provides, a typical, continental breakfast. They can simply come across the street and dine at the facility. That's the idea, anyways. We believe we comply with zoning regulations regarding landscaping around the perimeter of the site and all that good stuff. We do have an increase of approximately 12,563 square feet of impervious area. However, as I mentioned, we are pulling that back from the wetlands, and that allows us to use this area in between for some stormwater mitigation. So we have, by building a low hummock around this area, we're able to hold our water back. We can infiltrate that water. The water gets cleaned by the various vegetation that'll be planted there, and then it's released slowly into the natural wetlands so that we can show we're not increasing our flow rates, we're holding back our necessary water quality volume, and we're in compliance with engineering regulations regarding quantity of flow, and we're in compliance with wetlands regulations regarding the quality of discharge. I'll just go quickly through the stormwater management system. So the first line is defense for water. We bring it up on site. A couple of catch basins, traditional parking lot drainage system. Those catch basins will be equipped with what we call silt sacks or storm sacks that captures the heavy sediments. The basins have hooded outlets or elbowed outlets, which prevents oils or lighter than water material from going into the restoration area. So that's kind of like our pre-treatment system, and then our primary treatment system, of course, is the water sits in this now restored area of wetlands, and then it slowly works its way through this artificial hummock we're creating into the greater wetlands area. So it's actually a nice little development considering what's there today versus what we're proposing. Seems to be in line with all zoning regulations and all your regulations from a wetlands point of view. So if there's no questions for me, I think I'll just turn it over to Mr. Logan to
Actually,
describe.
just one quick question.
Sure.
So any runoff from the building will also be tied to the wetlands as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we would take roof drainage from the building and probably discharge that directly to one of the catch basins. That would be the thing to do.
Just a quick question while we're on this. Is there going to be any underground water storage involved, or is it all going to be above ground dispersal? Yeah.
We did at one point have Coltex storage in there. But typically the way you want to do this, because we're so close to the groundwater, you want to treat the water first before you infiltrate it, or at least pre-treat it. And so we took out the Coltex.
That's the one-story building, right?
The pre-treatment is provided within the basins
And you guys
themselves
right into it.
by those two measures that I mentioned, the silt sacks and the sumps, which remove the heavy sediments, and then the elbowed or the hooded outlets, which remove the lighter floatables. So that's the pre-treatment, and then your infiltration is this area.
Okay.
So that hummock is a low structure, about a foot high or so, that prevents water from rushing out of it. It slows the water down and provides.
Okay.
Do you have a calculation on the depth of the water table there?
Well, the water table is, because it's wetlands, the water table is within 2 feet of the ground.
I think it's even closer.
Certain times of year, it's at the ground.
Every time I've been there, that's saturated. That's why you use the word infiltrator.
Yeah.
How do you infiltrate into a saturated soil?
Well, so the water quality volume that we calculate, that we have to capture and treat, is the area above the ground surface, because that's the new area that we're capturing. So we did.
I can see transevaporation, but I can't see infiltration in that soil. I'm familiar with that area. I mean,
Right, so water is captured again behind the hummock to the depth, I think it's 9 inches if you look at the report, and that water can't go anywhere. It has to infiltrate, and it will infiltrate because it's higher than the surrounding water around it. So it will make itself into the ground. It won't stay at that level forever. It either has to infiltrate into the ground and merge with the existing groundwater, or it may slowly bleed through the hummock and get infiltration through the hummock itself, which can provide.
your soils report shows that this is extremely non-porous soil. So, I mean, it's all of the ones that Mr. Logan identified are not great for percolation.
Right. But we're holding back the water through a small dam that we're creating. So we're reducing the flow directly into the wetlands. It does go into the groundwater, of course.
Okay.
I think you're confusing.
Well, I'm trying to watch your calculations in terms of volumes versus what it can actually do. It was very confusing to me.
I'm sorry that I couldn't be more clear.
I know,
The
no. I
calculation.
mean, well, okay, never mind.
Water will infiltrate is the idea to understand. Even though there's groundwater at the surface, if I were to take a bucket of water and pour that on the ground, that's going to infiltrate. It certainly will. It certainly will. And I think maybe that's the concept you're getting over. We're holding back water to a certain depth. I think it's about 9 inches that I see in the report, about 0.75 or 0.8 feet. And that water will infiltrate. It will infiltrate.
Okay.
And it will take time. It'll happen slowly, but that's essentially what you want to have.
And I'm sorry, I can't remember. Was it designed for the 25 or 50-year storm event?
I would have to look back in the calculations. Let's see. We
'Cause
did
you-
run
you gave-
up to the 100-year storm event, which was 7 inches of rainfall. So that's a very large storm. Let me just see what we have at this point.
Because you gave the calculations for up to the 100-year storm, but I just don't know what it was designed for.
Yeah.
Can't
yep,
remember.
I'll tell you in just one moment if you can be. Just to answer the other gentleman's question, this pool is what the DEP Stormwater Quality Manual would call a micropool extended detention pond. So it's intended to be a wet pond. It's intended to be a wet pond. Mr. Logan can probably explain a little bit better the beneficial aspects of that. But as far as your question regarding the design storm, so 115.6. Trying to find here 161.78. It's designed for a 100-year storm.
Okay.
The maximum headwater at a 100-year storm is 161.8. Which is very little. You're talking about 7 inches of rain over the site. So it's designed for a large storm. It surely is.
At this time, I'd like to introduce George Logan of REMA Ecological Services, who will explain the environmental aspects of this application. As you can see from his submittal, George is a registered soil scientist, professional wetland scientist, and certified senior ecologist.
Good evening. You know who I am now, based on what our attorney just said. I'm glad to be here. I haven't been here before this commission probably since James Farms Road application, which I reviewed for the town at that time. I've been involved in this application now since February, as my soils report indicates, which I think has already been referenced. Was out there delineating wetlands in February while spring peepers were doing their thing because we had an unusual, almost summertime looking thing. It was degrees, almost 50 degrees. I'm going to jump around in some of the things I'm going to say because from some of the things that I've already heard from the commission, I think they're interested in what's happening to the water. But anyhow, the report that I submitted for the wetlands delineation is dated March 17th, 2017. Then I have a subsequent report, which is a wetlands assessment, dated October 2nd, 2017. I believe that's fairly thorough in looking at the potential issues with this application. As you know, this project, or this property has seen significant disturbance associated with the existing house. And you were right, when I was out there in February, of course I would expect that, but then some other times that we were out there, myself and also my associate, Sigrid Godwa, who you also probably recognize the name, we did have saturation at just about the surface of the lawn in the back. Now, mind you, most of the lawn, especially in the back side of the house, is a wetland. It has an aquatic moisture regime, and even though it doesn't have any wetland plants, it's been maintained as a lawn. It qualifies as a wetland, albeit a disturbed wetland. There's an aerial photograph in my report. I think it's called Figure 2. I've used the 2016 orthophotos that DEP has so kindly provided for us online. It's a 3-inch resolution. That means you can see a 3-inch object on the ground. And what you show, what I've superimposed on with the blue line is approximately where the wetland boundary is. And you can see a significant portion in the back there that looks like lawn is actually wetland, and then it grades into our swamp, which becomes increasingly more wet as you go into it. And as you probably noticed from the report, the soils there are poorly and very poorly drained, and then you get into the organic soils, the Freetown Cadden, which means that there's several feet, potentially several feet of organics within that wetland. And it's characterized with pronounced microtopography, so all the vegetation really of the woody kind is growing on hummocks. The rest of it is growing, depending on the time of the year when the water recedes, is not as seasonally flooded, which means as the season progresses, there's less and less water, although it could be saturated to the surface, and that's when your herbaceous species pop up. This overall wetland, and I'm talking about the undisturbed wetland, is several acres in size, and it's, for the most part, very poorly drained. I did note in the report that there was significant enough dieback of trees, particularly of red maples. I attributed that to not only the rising of water, but that the duration of flooding probably has, in that swamp, has been experiencing a prolonged duration more than it used to. I don't know why that's happening. Obviously, there's more volume of water that's coming from the surrounding habitats, the surrounding developed uses, but it's the restrictive culvert down on the north side that probably was the culprit. Now, I don't know if it's cleaned out or if it's what it is doing right now, but it's probably restricting water leaving the swamp, with the result that the water hangs out a little longer than it had before. The swamp itself, or the overall wetland, is fairly undisturbed except for this dieback. Even when you have a dieback, I mean, beavers do that all the time, don't they? But certain things come in. So with the dieback of the red maples, now the canopy is open. In some places, it's less than 50%, other vegetation has come in, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It increases diversity. The only problem, as you've noticed on the site, if you've been on the site and just off the site, is Phragmites. And Phragmites takes advantage of any disturbance, even if it's hydrologic disturbance or soil disturbance. So we have a patch that's partially on the site and partially off the site, but mostly on our site. We inventoried the wetlands several times during the growing season, as the report indicates. We assess the functional value of the overall wetland unit, which is not just the wetlands on the site, but, you know, the wetland that's there. Table 1 and page 10 of our report talks about the functions and values that we assessed. We utilized the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers descriptive method, which is the method that everyone likes to use nowadays, probably the only one that's sanctioned by DEP. There used to be, a long time ago, another functional value assessment was called bulletin number 9. You might remember that. I don't see anyone using it that lately. So we've progressed into using the descriptive approach, which basically doesn't give us a low, moderate, and high. What it does, it assesses whether a particular function or value, so functions are the things that are intrinsic to the wetland, whether we're there or not. Values is what we derive from the wetland as a society. And so if a particular function or value is there at a high degree, or at least above average for your town and the region, we say it's a principal value or function. If it's there but not at a great degree, we say it's there. And if it's not, we say it's not. So wetland 1, which is the overall wetland, and mind you that some of the portions of the wetland that are on our site really contribute very little to the overall function of the wetland, and that's something that I'll get back to. Aha, color. So obviously principal functions are groundwater recharge and discharge, flood flow alteration, I kind of alluded to that, and production export. That means there's a lot of good organic material that's exported down to the outlet watercourse and then down to Pumpkin Ground Brook. And there's other functions that are there, including, of course, wildlife habitat. The thing that I usually like to look at, and I could go and describe the wetland for you a little more. I could, if you'd like to. It's in the report. Is to talk about what we're proposing. I think that's probably what we're all here for. So the first thing that I usually look at, and we usually look at because we're forced to look at by the fact that there's a disturbance to wetlands, is the direct wetland impacts. In this particular case, this is kind of an unusual situation. Usually when we talk about wetland impacts, we talk about impacting wetlands that are not already disturbed, that are not already maintained as lawn. Sometimes we do. Mostly, we have a crossing, we have an encroachment for some use into vegetated wetlands, not lawn. In this case, we're looking to impact areas that are already functioning extremely low and that are disturbed, in which, as the attorney has said earlier, for the most part, except for a couple hundred or 300 square feet, was impact that was approved back in 1981 by the then DEEP. This is before your commission was formed. So according to submitted plans, we have 2,940 square feet of direct wetland impact. Again, this is all in the lawn. And we also have approximately of that, 360 square feet is the footprint of the proposed core logs, which are going to create and outline our biofiltration area, which is not only our water quantity, but also our water quality best management practice, which is completely going to be in the lawn area. The 360 square feet I don't consider to be a significant impact because it pretty much will function similarly to the hummocks that are in the swamp. They're higher than the seasonal high groundwater table. They will be vegetated, one of the things that we've done, and this is something I've experienced as of late. I'm involved in a large wetland mitigation project up in Hartford. It's called the South Hartford Conveyance and Storage Tunnel. You've probably heard about it. It's 4.5 miles of 27 diameter tunnel in bedrock that's going from Hartford, West Hartford. Part of what MDC is doing to make sure that we don't have water, untreated water that's going into the Connecticut River. So we had to restore a wetland, and one of the things we did is we used the core logs, a core log system, not just one, but it's a system. And they're staked in, they're roped in, they're stacked, and then we put fascines, which is these willow whips, if you will, and they've done extremely well, very, very well. And so this is something that not only will keep this berm vegetated and stable, but also provides a habitat function. And that's what we're proposing here. We talked about in the report about indirect wetland impacts, and usually I split those into post-construction and during construction, short-term and long-term. Erosion sedimentation control, obviously that's kind of easy here. We have a very flat site, relatively small, really not disturbing in cutting and filling, which is a good thing. And there's a detailed erosion sedimentation control plan, which meets the guidelines. Another thing that we talk about is removal of native vegetation and habitat loss, and this is very often where we get into discussions about proposed wetland buffers. We usually don't like to, in an undisturbed situation, go right up to the wetland itself. We usually like to leave at least an average 25, 30, 40 feet, depending on the sensitivity and the function of the wetland itself. This is kind of a little different because we're really not taking down any native vegetation. All of our activities are going to be in areas that are already disturbed or in lawn. And then another, when I look at indirect impacts, obviously past the famous case that we all know by heart, Avalon Bay versus Wilton Conservation Commission that I was involved in, and then I was actually past that involved in the one that was done in Stratford, which also made law. And so we now talk about physical impacts to the resource. So past the indirect, the direct impacts, we're impacting a wetland here, even though it's a disturbed wetland already. We look at other physical impacts, which be alteration of hydrology and flow, and then, of course, water quality impacts. So there's a section in there. We talk about wetland hydrology and stream flow. Obviously, that's not going to be an impact here. This is, we're not diverting any streams, and we're not denying any water to where it's already going today. So the wetland is secure as far as our project is concerned from any changes in hydrology and stream flow. And then we finally come to water quality impacts, and this is something that I've spent a good part of my almost 30 years of my career not only trying to understand but also trying to educate folks on how to do it so that we don't have water quality impacts in wetlands and in streams. What we've done here is, it's been explained by the engineer, is to take a water quality volume, which you all know is a runoff of our impervious surfaces during a 1-inch storm, which is the water quality storm. And we've detained it within our stormwater basin, which I'm calling biofiltration basin, which is also part of our wetland restoration, if you will. We talked about the core log system, but one thing that's also important that we talked about, and it's in the plans, is I think something that you just mentioned a little earlier, which was, well, how we get the water back into the ground to the extent possible through infiltration. And as you correctly stated, it's kind of very difficult during the height of the growing of the whole groundwater regime for us to be infiltrating water into the ground when, under existing conditions, this area, the water is right at the surface. And for a significant part of the year, it's there, except for when we were out there in the summer. Two things. We looked at that and we said, okay, number one, we need to not only treat the water, but also vacate this area, which is going to be holding about 9 inches maximum water, for the next storm to come in and be treated. So if that's just a pond, and the next storm comes in and the thing hasn't vacated yet, it's just going to go right through. Very little water quality attenuation. Now, there are cases when that happens because you have back-to-back storms, and it's very difficult to, in any case, to vacate enough water. But I'm talking about storms that are, at least 72 hours apart. So what we instituted here, as I thought about this, and is something that I've used in other projects and I've suggested, and it's been included in the plan, is to provide a pervious berm section. So somewhere here, not only is this area going to act as a spillway, so when the water fills, this is going to safely get to the other side without erosive forces, but it's also going to, over time, and again, the target for us usually 72 hours, get the water out through this pervious berm in order to vacate that area from water and allow the next storm to be treated. And now, the other thing also that I've noticed is if you, in a saturated condition, if you take a bucket of water and perforate the bottom, fill it and put it on the ground out there, it will infiltrate because you have a hydraulic head. The water will do that. It's not going to just sit there. But we're not going to rely on that, obviously. We're going to rely on the fact that we have a pervious berm. And, of course, what probably is in the back of your mind is, which is in the back of my mind also, is, okay, well, that works for a year. What happens after that? Right? That's where the maintenance plan comes in, which is also part of the application, where the typical thing that I would say, like I would do also in a bioretention area or a rain garden, is that if we see water still there that's more than an inch or so past 72 hours, something's wrong with the berm, with the pervious berm. So that has to be looked at, maintained, and or redone if necessary. And usually what I always recommend is that any of the things that we come up with or we think are going to work, because we've read some article that they're going to work or have seen it ourselves that it's going to work, conditions happen, is that during the first year, what I would recommend, if it's not already somewhere in our documents, is that we look at how the berm is doing its job, the pervious berm, during the first 5 or 6 storms that are more than an inch, to see how it will respond. And I would do the same thing if you had a bioretention area. Make sure that it's working. So my belief is that, we can talk about the direct impacts, but if it's from perspective of indirect physical impacts, whether short-term or long-term, I believe we're in good stead here. And I guess what I would say, in my professional opinion, is that, having been looking at this plan now for months, it's morphed, it's gone back and forth, it's changed, we've added things, we've improved, we disproved, we re-improved, that if this is done as seen on the particular plan, and with some of the caveats that I'm mentioning here, I believe that the functions and values of the wetland, which is the larger system, are protected. So I don't see any impacts as far as that is concerned. Having said that, we could just, rest on our laurels and say, we're done. But I'm always looking for opportunities to make something better because there's always impacts. There's always, if you all go out there, is always a little impact. But we always try to offset by going the extra mile. And so, where's the issue? Somewhere here. That confused me, thank you. So what we've done, and there's a little section in the report, we're mitigating. How are we mitigating? Well, we're not doing activities within the entire lawn. So I said, okay, if that's the case, and by the way, we went out there and kind of did a few measurements because we were confused, between the drip line of a tree and where actually the lawn comes, it could be another 10 or 15 feet. So we went out there and measured to see, where that lawn actually ends, and that's what we came up with, this yellow area. So there are three components to the mitigation. I'll call them what we're doing here for water quality purposes, which is good. Wetlands do attenuate water quality and polish, which is kind of what we're doing here. And if you look at the plan in the back, it's pretty detailed, as you can see. All kinds of notes as how we implement these kinds of things. And this is, again, almost 30 years of doing this. Every time we think of, let's add this because we see that this is important. So what we're doing in this biofiltration area, which is also wetland restoration, no lawn anymore, is we're planting, I think it was 210 plugs. So our vision there is for a lush, dense, wet meadow. And the species are into that. And by the way, I'll show you a very important note. We learn again from experience, and there it is, in black. Note, all wetland mitigation work should be supervised by an ecologist or wetland scientist, including initial grading, planting, marking invasive and adjacent upland areas, and marking any native materials for solvents, et cetera, et cetera. So we kind of insert ourselves to do that, or someone like ourselves, so wetlands professional, because we have learned that how you implement the plan is extremely important, or it's not going to work. And I've had some horror stories over the years, believe me. So we've learned. So that's what's going on in this area. Now, in the rest of the area, apart from, remember we talked about the core logs, those are going to have the willows and a few other things on them. And then we have a treatment of both scarified and this particular seed mix that's going to, again, become wet meadow, but then planting all kinds of shrubby things that like this kind of hydrology. I chuckle because of this. Of course, by the way, Phragmites has to be removed and some particular protocol for removing the Phragmites. This is kind of what we need to do because of so many stuff. So we kind of have some trees, they're native obviously, but I'd like a little more diversity. We have a few that, but our hands are kind of tied because we need to put a buffer. For what reason, I'm not exactly sure, because of the starlings that use the wetland. I'm not sure, because no one's going to see that side anyhow. It's very dense in that. But this is what we have to do. So again, my thought is that the mitigation that we're proposing is going to actually more than offset the impacts that we have here. The wetland is protected from a water quality perspective. We're enhancing the wetland itself, the one that's already disturbed, because we're not really cutting anything down. And the last little thing that component is this. When someone says, why do you even bother? It's only 680 square feet or something. But this is, we delineated it out. It's an island that's comprised of junk, bituminous, all kinds of stuff that's been thrown there when, I'm not sure, probably with the initial construction. Thankfully, what we were able to do is we're saving 2 clumps of red maples on the side. So we squished it in so we don't impact those. Those are here and there. And we're removing that and creating a little bit of wetland. Not humongous, but again, I'm always looking for opportunities to do what I believe is the right thing. Of course, we have the phragmites, and the phragmites it's not going to be an easy thing. My client probably doesn't realize that you need to have a specialist, and you need to be persistent, and you need to do certain things there for probably 2 to 3 years. We've done it. We've had success. We know what needs to happen. It's not a very big area, thankfully. But the idea is you cordon off that area, you hit the Phragmites once really hard with a herbicide, which is formulated specifically for being able to be sprayed on wetlands. And I would be involved, so I would talk to the licensed herbicide applicator, make sure that he's using the proper formulation so that you don't have aquatic impacts of aquatic organisms. So that's the big hit. And then what you do is once the herbicide half-life is over and is no longer in the ground, and before the few sprouts come back up, you plant it like crazy with things that are eventually going to shade it. And then for the next 2 or 3 years, you go out there and go, there's one. And you use the wicking technique, which is very simple. You wear a protective glove, and over that you wear another glove, which is you can use as a wick, and you put the herbicide on your glove, and you just go whoosh, wick just the Phragmites. You know, the old system of you cut it and you inject wicking. So, and that has to happen for probably another 2 years past the first big application, because they're always going to come up. And then once that happens and the area gets shaded out, then the Phragmites can't anymore encroach. Now, how do I know that? If you look at the swamp, in the areas that are very well shaded, there is no Phragmites. In the areas that have been impacted, where you have less than 50% coverage, you see in one of the pictures, you see sprouts of Phragmites. They're not going to do very well unless we lose more of the canopy. So that kind of gives you an idea of how shading works to dissuade Phragmites. I'm not sure what else you'd like to hear from me. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you have at this time. Yes.
Mr. Chairman? First thing I'd like to say is this is probably one of the best reports I've seen in a long time.
Thank you.
I hope you got paid by the pound. But,
yes, there's a big pound there, you know.
Yeah. Your expertise has obviously been reflected in this. The principal functions of this property, to me, are fairly significant. Are you familiar with this corridor that this is on? We have actually just below this, and because in one of the functions there's uniqueness in, what is it?
Uniqueness and heritage.
In heritage/heritage.
Right.
This area actually has a name.
Which the swamp?
Well, the corridor, and the swamp marsh just below it actually is called the Snake Pit. Snake Pit.
Oh, gosh, okay.
And it has been identified that way for for generations. One of the things that we have recognized in the past is that this corridor, which it's part of, extends most of the Bruce Brook. This is the upper area of Bruce Brook in Stratford, which then extends across, unfortunately, the Merritt Parkway, but then also continues on up into Roosevelt Forest. And we had actually, I happened to be on the Conservation Commission as well, and we had a meeting last night where that was also recognized. I am concerned about this corridor being impacted. There's a lot of terrestrial movement in this corridor, obviously, but there's also a lot of avian use. Things such as the new lighting that's going to be in this area, the amount of disturbance in terms of nighttime use where you don't have in a residential use, have all been concerns of ours. Can you address that a little bit?
Yeah, I guess I can. Here's the predicament that I find myself in, and this is a discussion that we've had in our office with Sigrid and others, as to what constitutes physical impacts on wetlands, which obviously those are the ones you folks have to look at. So when we talk about auditory disturbances or visual disturbances, someone might argue that those are physical too, because noise is physical and light is physical, but the courts haven't made that really clear at this point. Having said that, I think it's important to be considered. So you're right, in a sense, instead of having, 2 or 3 cars, now you're going to have potentially up to 38. And lights, et cetera, and that's understandable. I'm not exactly sure how that could be regulated under the Wetlands Act as of yet. I don't disagree with you in what you're saying. So I guess the fallback for this is to say 2 things. One, we could certainly, there's not a lighting plan that's part of this application. That's usually something that goes to the next step. But, we have projects that I've been involved. We do use the particular lighting that's the dark sky regs. They're not widely disseminated, but they're out there. I even have a book this big on that. So possibly we can look into utilizing those principles for dark sky, the dark sky principles. And then the other thing is that, obviously light that's coming off cars as they go back and forth will be somewhat attenuated by, the vegetation that's there already. So maybe I shouldn't be talking that badly about dense stuff that's going to actually grow. And so the core, from an avian perspective, and also because, honestly, the opening of the swamp, except for the Phragmites, is really not a bad thing, because there's a lot more vegetation that comes in, which attracts more wildlife, especially avians. A lot of nectaring, a lot more flowers instead of being in the shade. So there's probably a buffer that's going to be good. And of course, there's a lot of that's going to grow more and more as time goes by. And of course, we have the willows. Obviously, I don't know if you're familiar with these willow fascines. When you put them in, they're about 8 feet. And within literally a season, they're taller than me, usually up to 8 feet. And then they basically thicken out. So by doing that, we're providing buffer to that grows thick, and it will grow thick probably within a couple of seasons. So that's something that attenuates light. Auditory disturbance, that's a tough one. You're already in a corridor. You have Hawley Drive. There's a lot of commercial establishments. That's a widely used road, and we're not too far off of that. So there's already noise in the area. It's kind of hard to quantify how much additional noise we would have. But I think we're trying to do the best that we can in some of these mitigative measures to provide diversification of habitat. So that's going to attract, there are a lot of avians that don't care whether there are humans there. They kind of, the cosmopolitan, and there's plenty of those around. I saw the song sparrows back there. Those won't care. Carolina wrens, etc. The noisy guys, the blackbirds, they don't care. And there's a big enclave of red-winged blackbirds that use that area now because it's more open, and they won't mind. So I don't particularly see, although it's an important corridor, and I know it goes further down and further up. I'm familiar with that. I think the integrity of the corridor, but by the fact of the matter that we're not encroaching more than what's there now, is going to be preserved. So you're going to still have a wildlife use, wildlife movement through the area.
I have another question, more technical.
Uh-oh.
In your soil, to you, your soil survey.
Yes.
As you can see, there has been a lot of fill over the years in that rear yard. In fact, I was going to comment on the DEP letter. The DEP letter giving the Sedlak property permission to maintain fill. It was an after-the-fact permit.
Yeah.
I had been involved in this property since 1975. I know I don't look that old, but...
Oh, come on.
But it was to maintain an ongoing filling.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you stop? And obviously, the yellow part where you found wetlands, you got through the UDWs or aquiant soils.
Mm-hmm.
At which point did you now say this is now an upland soil? By depth of fill, or
Okay.
what was the criteria that you used to stop at that point?
So the criteria, that's a tough one. Now, I'll tell you this. I cheated a little bit.
Put that on the record, please.
There was another soil scientist that you probably know. His name is Tom Petras. He's been before this commission before, and he's probably considered one of the best soil scientists in Connecticut. I would say that because I trained under him. And when I get into a bind, I always call him. So he had done the delineation before, and if you looked at my delineation and his, they more or less mirror each other. So not that I was going to say, okay, Tom is right, and I got to go with Tom. What happens here is you move this way, you start losing some of the characteristics in the soils themselves. So even though you go out there now and into the future, you look at my upland areas and you'll say, gee, George, I got water here a few inches from the surface. True. But what we have to do is we have to determine whether we have an aquic moisture regime. And so how do we determine that is by looking at certain characteristics of the soils. Now, the soils are filled. So you're going to say, well, how are you going to determine that?
How do you find chroma in fill?
Right. You look for fine evidence of redoxomorphic features, of redox within the soils themselves. So where the soil redox is dominant, then you say, okay, now I know the water hangs out here more, and therefore I got an aquic moisture regime. And obviously there's a judgment, professional judgment that comes into play. I'm usually fairly conservative, but that's kind of how we do it. I mean, yes, there's fill out there everywhere, and both in the areas that I call uplands and the areas that I call wetlands. And so at some point, I have to determine whether the characteristics on the wetland side are dominant enough to be able to call it something a wetland. It's tricky.
May I continue? You want to jump in?
Well, I had a different question than you. You want to finish your...
Okay. You understand that also that there's going to obviously be a demolition project here as well.
Yeah.
In that, there's going to be the obvious characteristic impacts from that. The one that normally we have a real problem with is the dewatering process when you start digging out foundations and digging holes. What would be your recommendation?
Yeah. Obviously, I'd have to confer with the engineer. I know that's on slab, so obviously that has to be removed and plus something. Again, dewatering.
Discharging into this area, which is fairly, other than the disturbed areas, is reasonably pristine soils, and it's a organic soil, and as you, I'm sure, know, small veneers of silt are going to make your chances for Phragmites and other problems.
Oh, I fully appreciate that. You're right, and I did mention in the report that as you go way further into the swamp, that the soils there are have a hammock, not a fibric, but a hammock, but not mucks, which means they're very, very slowly decomposing. I believe, and I will turn to the engineer to tell me, because he's going to have a way of doing that, whereas upland areas currently that are away from wetlands, which can be used for dewatering. So, typical situations are, you've seen it in the books, of if you have to pump out, you pump to an area that's protected, sometimes triple hay bales, etc. And nowadays we use the silt sacks. That's another way of doing it. Those big bladder-looking things.
Yep.
And so you can pump to those, and those work fairly well as long as you don't overwhelm them. So I would suggest that there are ways of doing it correctly. I don't know that I've said in my report how that would be done, because
Well, it wasn't identified in any of the reports as part of the process, the demolition.
that's why I'm not saying this is about my pay grade, but I'm turning to the engineer, because usually engineers are more so involved in the construction part. But yeah, I appreciate that, and dewatering has to be addressed. But the way that it's addressed typically is, and it's not sort of a cop-out, but is to say, we're going to abide with the guidelines. 2002 guidelines. By the way, I'm told that those are going to be revised. They've been told that for the last 2 years, but that's how things go really, really slow up in Hartford. And I think they're adding some of these innovative ways of protecting the resources.
Thank you again for your report.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I just have another question on the parking area itself. Do you have any opinion on whether making the parking lot a pervious type surface, like either using pervious pavement or gravel, would serve any additional benefit to percolation of stormwater on the property? Or is the groundwater just too high?
Yeah, I've been in past few years where we've used either the previous pavement. I actually just finished doing one in Vernon, Carter Chevrolet. And where we put it is in areas of vehicle storage. So those are areas that don't have high traffic, but so the traffic lanes are protected with having regular pavement, and then the storage areas are. Yeah, I suppose that's something that I'm not sure that I can quickly comment because there's a lot of considerations to look at, the quality of the fill. You have to basically have a sub-base that's going to allow for the water to come in, and then we have we do have a retaining wall, and structurally, I'm not sure how that would work if you're putting water down that might leak through the retaining wall and cause heave during certain times of the year. I'm not against. Yeah, sure, but again, I think in most cases we try to use them in low traffic areas for storage or for overflow parking, those kinds of things. Although there's more information coming out of the University of New Hampshire Stormwater Center, where they've been looking at these things now, and the results are positive. And I think maybe over the next year or two, they're going to publish a new fact sheet up there. It's been a long time since we've seen anything from them. But
I mean, I only ask I think it would be a nice alternative to explore, just being that this is one of the first applications we've seen in a long time that actually has a direct wetland impact.
Mm-hmm.
So, anything we can do to offset the...
now, I'll say this. Again, that's just something that we would have to have an internal discussion here, and the factors, obviously, that I can't consider right off the top of my mind that have to do with structural stability of what's out there. But yeah, that's something we could look into.
Thank you.
Christianity can address that right now for you.
Sure.
Chris DeAngelis again for the record, professional engineer basis DeAngelis. Regarding the pervious pavers, that would undoubtedly help with some of the infiltration, but I'll call your attention to the wall detail, specifically the section that shows the parking lot again is filled, and then this retaining wall that we're using is actually like a hollow concrete block filled with crushed stone, backfilled with crushed stone, all wrapped in filter fabric. It does provide a lot of infiltration itself. There's really no good area. The thing about pervious pavers, you always want to have a defined area to put them. You might pick one row of parking or another, and it's generally the lowest area on the site. In this case, we're trying to avoid water rushing over the retaining wall into the wetlands, so we kind of set the low point in the center of the parking lot. I think, maybe in lieu of pervious pavers, what we did, which we talked about internally in the office, is we have one pipe that runs from the easterly catch basin to the westerly catch basin. We could make that more of an infiltration trench, so we could have it a perforated pipe, again wrapped in filter fabric and stone, and allowing water to bleed out, so that you didn't get a rush of water out into the restored wetlands areas. I think that would be just a simpler and more effective way of infiltrating the water into that fill area. We have about 2 to 2.5 feet of fill, so that would allow the water to kind of utilize that void space and infiltrate.
Thank you, Chris and George. Now, this public hearing tonight was scheduled as a result of the Commission at its last meeting, initially making a finding pursuant to your regulation, Section 10.3, that this proposed activity may have a significant impact on wetlands or watercourses. Because of this initial finding, you cannot approve this application unless you make a subsequent finding on the basis of the record that a feasible and prudent alternative to this does not exist. Feasible and prudent alternative. Now, in our application documents, we submitted 2 alternatives to this proposal, one of which was a do-nothing alternative. But you see those all the time. That alternative would involve maintaining the existing residential property in its current state, not constructing the new building in the parking lot. Although this alternative would have had no effect on the existing wetlands, it would also not allow the beneficial economic and ecological aspects of this proposed development to be realized. And as indicated by our application documents, there would be no way to prevent the current owner of this property from applying various pesticides and fertilizers directly into the wetland soils, which will not happen under this proposal. So while the do-nothing alternative may sound good from an ecological perspective, it really isn't, because it kind of leaves the door open for potential damage to the environment vis-a-vis pesticides and fertilizers. The second alternative that we considered consisted of placing the new building and parking lot in different locations on this site. We looked at the center, closer to the road, farther from the road. As George indicated, we've been working on this thing since February. Poor Christy Angelis has probably done half a dozen iterations of this proposed site plan where we are trying to find the best prospective proposal for you. One of which shows the building in the middle of the lot with parking lot associated with it. It was reviewed by myself, by the applicant. A copy of that site plan was included with our application under the other alternate options. Unfortunately, in order to fit that building and the required parking on the site, the parking lot would have needed to be placed much closer to the wetlands, resulting in awkward and inefficient parking layout. The total area of impact to the wetlands under that proposal was determined to be about 8,800 square feet, which consisted largely of filling operations. Additionally, the new dumpster, grease trap, and sanitary lift station all would have needed to be placed much closer to the existing wetlands under alternative number 2. And when I say alternative number 2, I'm talking about alternative number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because we looked at least 6 different site plans, okay? Now, you have to make a finding that there are no feasible and prudent alternatives to this proposal. Exhibit 11 is a copy of Section 22-38 of the Connecticut General Statutes, which is the definitional section of the wetlands regulations, the state statutes that define what the wetlands regulations terminology means. And I've highlighted subsections 17 and 18 of that regulation where the definitions of feasible and prudent are set forth. And it's on the second page of Exhibit 11. I've outlined them in yellow. And feasible is fairly simple to understand. Feasible means able to be constructed or implemented consistent with sound engineering principles. Okay, well, certainly this proposal that we're presenting tonight meets the definition of feasible. Obviously, it's feasible that this thing could be constructed. So we meet the condition, the feasible. The definition of prudent is a little more involved. Prudent means economically and otherwise reasonable in light of the social benefits to be derived from the proposed regulated activity, provided costs may be considered in deciding what is prudent, and further provided a mere showing of expense will not necessarily mean an alternative is imprudent. What this means in a nutshell, when you read this definition of prudent, is that you are allowed to consider economic issues in determining what is prudent. You are allowed to look at economic issues. I've said that before to bodies similar to this in other towns, and it was as if I was speaking heresy, that a wetlands commission should not be considering economic issues. Well, the statute that you have before you in Exhibit 11 says that you can and must consider economic issues because it's under the definition of prudent and feasible alternative. Now, in this case, the applicant is proposing to fill 198 square feet of wetlands, which was not previously permitted by the old DEP approval letter. The applicant is also proposing to restore some of this previously filled wetlands, as George has explained. Is it prudent to deny an applicant the ability to construct a commercial development on a 3.2 acre parcel of property, which is zoned for commercial development, simply because he is filling in 198 square feet of wetlands on a site which is 3.2 acres in size, of which approximately half are wetlands? So we're talking about 198 square feet on a site that's got 60,000 square feet of wetlands, at least 60,000 square feet. The negative impact on wetlands here is outweighed by the positive impact to the same wetlands that will result from the applicant's restoration and mitigation proposal as outlined by George Logan. And is also outweighed by the economic benefit that will be derived to the town of Stratford by virtue of economic development of this particular property. Certainly, the filling of 198 square feet of wetlands is of such a de minimis impact that it would be imprudent, not prudent, to deny this application simply because a smaller amount of wetlands is being filled, especially considering the huge size of the parcel and the significant amount of other wetlands located on the site and in the area. I mean, not just this site is wet. It's wet everywhere. It's wet across the street. It's wet up and down Hawley Lane. There's wetlands all over the place. This 198 square feet of wetlands is not fatal, notwithstanding the smile on Bill McCann's face, to the existence of a viable wetland community in this area. Now, I know that it is considered to be heresy for somebody, a lawyer, to stand up here and say that it's okay to fill in wetlands. Who's this lawyer to tell me it's okay to fill in wetlands? It is not illegal to fill in wetlands. It is legal to fill in wetlands as long as it's feasible and prudent. The Army Corps of Engineers allows you to fill in 4,999 square feet of wetlands before you even have to apply to them for a permit. So the filling of wetlands is not illegal, notwithstanding what some people think. And this is such a small deal that it should not hold up, especially when we got George Logan and Chris DeAngelis in our corner, who've designed a fantastic remediation plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak in support of this proposal? Anyone want to speak in opposition? Okay, we're going to close this public hearing. Thank you.
We gotta make
A 5-minute
motion.
recess?
I'll make a motion. Close the public.
Second. Public hearing is closed. We'll take a brief recess, 5 minutes.
It was originally residential, because there was a house on the property. Oh, yeah. Okay? And now, now it's obviously changed to commercial.
Yeah. I mean, he's got a residential piece there.
Yeah, I understand what he says.
You could put that in commercial.
Yeah, it's not. They're sit down.
Well, I don't, I have them all.
It's going to be a very big restaurant.
No, 38 spaces, car spaces. That's this.
I'll ask if we can take that as well. Is that compared to what I Hey,
I'd be curious to know what kind of
Barry,
restaurant they're going to put
quick
in.
question. The plans that were displayed, are those exactly the same as what were provided?
I would say,
I hate to see them go through
Is there anything
all of this.
I don't even know if it's a restaurant or a diner.
Quick
There is
question.
one with
Is
diner.
everything that was presented on the easel provided in the packet that came to us as part of the
Yes,
application?
it is. This is the same plans, except they've been colored.
Color, got it. Okay,
Right.
that's fine. Otherwise, we just needed,
You could have these, that's absolutely.
I'll take them anyways. Is that fine?
If there's anything other than what we have, it has to be presented to us. That's all.
I'll just take the color one so we have it for future reference. That'd be good.
No, we haven't adjourned the meeting yet.
No, recess, we're on recess. We're in recess.
Yes, well, we won't take it off. It's an old business item, so we're gonna, you can pass over it. And then go on to the second one.
Thank you so much. And then we can discuss it.
Yeah, yeah, I think so.
I mean, I think we're safe.
Yeah, yeah, we need time to digest it. Yeah, we don't even have to go, we can go to old business and go, leave A on the table. We're gonna go B. What's the rest? No, I know. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's my. Yeah, no. No, because it's. Yeah. Yeah. That's right, that's right. Exactly.
5 minutes, right? Yeah, let's see.
You guys ready?
Actually, 6 minutes.
Okay, so it is 8:30. Like to call the regular meeting of the Stratford Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Commission to order. First item on the agenda, approval of the minutes of the October 18th meeting. Has everyone had a chance to read them?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of October 18th.
Mr. Hoyek, motion to approve. Second? Is there a second? John Waite, all in favor?
Aye.
Approved. Okay, old business. We're going to leave the application 2017.4 on the table for now. Application 2016.16.
I'll make a motion to take application 2016-16 off the table.
We have a motion, we have a second? Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. This is a review of the mitigation plan to be handled via administrative permit. Tina?
That's correct, and I believe there's a representative from Two Roads Brewery here. If you just want to come forward and maybe just give us a brief description on the mitigation plan that you've the mitigation plan that you've put together for the premises.
Brian O'Connor from Neil Houck Architects. Peter Doring from Two Roads Brewery. Everybody has this in their packet? Hello?
Does everyone have a copy?
I saw it already.
No, there's one down here.
It came in your packet. Did you have it?
What packet?
Your packets didn't come. Nobody's packets arrived.
Yeah, I got what I could off the internet.
Yes.
They went out last week.
I have, we have two. Let me hand this.
I don't know. No, it goes, I sent it out in Public Works like Wednesday, last Wednesday or Thursday.
Well, there's where you went wrong. You said it's a public.
Not your fault.
Well, don't forget the post office wasn't working Monday.
Well, yeah,
Right.
but still, I sent it out on Thursday.
Okay,
Should have
yeah.
arrived.
Thank you.
You know when they'll get it? Get it tomorrow.
Yeah, probably.
Okay, just a quick overview.
Yep.
We worked with William Kenny Associates, and the plan is to clean up the wetlands area. As you know, there are the water drains from the other side of Metro North, and there's a whole bunch of trash that flows through and all that. So the goal is to clean that up, and as you see by Bill Kenny's plan, ultimately get rid of all the invasive species of plants, replant with native plants, also incorporate a boardwalk, which I know Peter can talk to as far as how that's going to be used with the brewery. I also know Brad is talking to the Audubon Society about birds, documenting them and having them as part of the program. And that's pretty much it at this point. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer.
Yeah, do you have a who, what, when, and where kind of thing going? Or
I'm sorry?
who's going to do it? When are they going to do it?
They are actually, we're working, Two Roads is going to get involved with clearing out all the invasive species. Bill Kenny has already walked the site with them. They've marked it. He has a report on what is being removed, what is being saved, and how they're going to replant it. And the ultimate plan is the packet of images, which is replanting native species. They also want to replant native fruit species, which they'll use in the brewing process. I know their ultimate goal is to make it part of the brewery, have tours going through it, little placards talking about the native plants, the native fruit plants that they're using in the process, and then that's pretty much.
I thought this was going to be a little bit more inclusive of, what's going to go into the plan and what kind of plantings and.
Well, they're still working on the details of everything, so I'm sure as soon as I get that, I'll bring it forward to you.
All right.
I would like to handle the permit itself administratively.
Well, this is an after-the-fact situation, right?
Yeah, well,
They
because
have
in the original permit, it just said that the applicant was going to have to perform X amount of mitigation to offset the disturbance to the wetland. That's all it said in the permit.
So do we
In the-
have to
in the
make a
per-
motion to approve the restoration plan, or?
I don't think so. I just wanted to
No,
give
it's yeah, we've
the
approved it,
benefit
but
of
there was a certain, I mean, the stipulations, the oral stipulations were a little bit more inclusive. We don't, and no particular disrespect to you guys, but I mean, we don't want Joe Blow going out there with a backhoe deciding that he's going.
Agree. But I mean, I spoke with Brad personally, and I mean, he's really got a good handle on this, and like he is. He's working with Bill Kenny, and
Yeah, Bill
he's
is-
working with
is-
the Audubon Society.
Because we don't want the hydraulics to change. I mean,
No, and they're actually opening up the hydraulics of the system. So for years, there hasn't been a connection between the culvert under Metro North Railroad and the one that exits the property on the western side
Yeah.
out to Stratford Avenue. They're actually restoring water flow in that entire area, is the idea. And so I spoke with John Casey, because he was originally wondering if they're going to be doing this mitigation anyways, can we restore that flow? So that's a major part of this mitigation plan.
Didn't they have to do some cleanup work?
Yeah, they're literally taking
There's quite a bit.
tons
Quite a bit.
of fill.
is the width of this
That has
required?
not specifically been determined.
Yeah, it looks a little over the top in terms of,
Yeah, that's a representation of the direction that Two Roads wants to go with the property.
yeah, that's a highway.
It's a concept there, but yeah,
Because
we
your
would-
your first representation was you were going to have, like, your employees can walk through there on their break or whatever.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
this-
we have
this
to
looks
have
like it's
some
ready
sort
for
of-
a,
That system actually sits on pods that sit on top of the earth. It's
yeah,
kind of
well, it's got to be elevated. I mean, that's
Right.
part and parcel of, why you have that. Madam Administrator, I think if you get a representation of what the walkway is going to look like, I think we have to have it very modest, to use a phrase. When you get it, can you make that recommendation? You're going to present a recommendation to her before you actually start?
We were hoping that we could start at least cleaning out the trash.
Well, I don't think that's a problem. I think
Yeah,
that,
that's
but
actually part of
it's
the
going to have to be
original permit.
coordinated with our administrator.
And Brad actually, when I spoke with Brad last, he was going to keep me appraised of the whole process as it was moving forward.
Yeah,
So,
As you saw in that, part and parcel of that last application, I mean, you saw what we were going through. We actually have an ecologist in most of these things hired by the applicant to go in, give us a report and all the rest of that. Yours is not quite that extensive, but we expect something, very
Oh,
professional.
absolutely, absolutely. And we have, we just got a report actually 2 days ago from William Kenny on the plants that are being marked to be removed, the invasive species that are being removed. We've had him walk the site with us. He's marked, the areas that need to be cleared and future areas like the pond and all that kind of stuff. But
As long as we're clear that everything goes through
everything goes,
the conservation administrator.
absolutely.
Okay.
I also think it behooves us to remember that, unlike the public hearing application we just heard, this parcel is in far worse shape. The wetlands were just an absolute disaster, and I think this represents a much higher benefit than what we're seeing from the previous application. But I'm excited to see what the final plan is.
Is the new building in place yet?
New building is under construction. They just started, so the foundation is.
Your beer pool? Don't you have aren't you putting in a beer pool? Isn't that what you said in the last application? I always thought that was an interesting,
A beer pool?
on one of your applications, you said that you referred to,
Oh, the cool shit. It's an old, I'm not quite sure if I understand it completely, but it's an old Belgian way of brewing beer.
I thought your employers are going to love that, but,
It's enclosed. So.
all right.
Yeah, we'll definitely keep you abreast of everything.
No,
We'll
yeah.
Send you all the reports.
Through her, I mean, keep in touch with that office.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just while we're on the discussion of this, the mitigation plan looks good and everything else. My own personal preference would not to be encouraging a lot of people to walk through the wetland. Don't make it too presentable that they're going to be traipsing around through there all the time. The main concern was,
was for your employees, not the people that come in.
No, it would be on a private tour.
yeah, the main concern was
A small group of
to mitigate and restore, not to have like
Disneyland.
groups of
It's
people
not open-
going
it's
through.
not open.
That would be my preference. It's up to what, everyone else would want, but
Yeah, I can't say that Two Roads is going through a lot of effort to, clean this area up, and they definitely do not want the public just to wander through there.
okay, right, thank
It'll be on a private tour.
Just the dog park. Nothing else for this, no.
Thank you, guys.
All right, moving right along. New business, no new business. Staff
No new
reports.
business. Staff report. The only item is an administrative permit that's currently still in draft form. It's administrative permit 2017-XA at this time. It's installation of fencing and creation of a wood chip dog park within an upland review area of wetlands, and this is for the Stratford Dog Park Action Committee, where there was a dog park approved for Roosevelt Forest on Peters Lane in the area of the former ranger station, which has been demolished as per order of the town council. So the ranger station has been completely demolished. I've put together a draft of an administrative permit for the creation of the dog park. In a nutshell, it gives the permission for installation of a gravel parking area, a perimeter fence, wood chips, comfort station for the dog park, and some of the conditions that I've placed on the permit, in addition to our standard boilerplate stuff, silt fencing around the project area, and, entering and exit the work zone from one area, no major machinery within 50 feet of a wetland. In addition to those, I added some items that are more pertinent to the dog park itself. So we're going to require that a wood strip be placed along the bottom of the permanent fencing that's going around the dog park to ensure that all wood chips are going to be appropriately contained and they're not going to fly out from the chain link fence. The comfort stations must have waste receptacles and must be provided, and they have to be there, and they must be emptied regularly, and the station must be stocked with garbage bags for pet waste at all times. Pet owners are solely responsible for and must pick up after their pets. And one item that I find particularly important is that Cemetery Pond Brook has already been shown to be of impaired water quality due to high E. coli levels. So if future data comes back showing that the water course is experiencing any higher levels of contamination of E. coli and the impairment becomes worse, it could be at the discretion of the Conservation Department or the Health Department to immediately close the park until the source of E. coli has been remedied. So if there's any feces getting into the waterway, we have an out to close the park until the water quality improves. That was really the biggie. I just want to make sure that if pet owners aren't being responsible and aren't cleaning up after their pets, I have a means to go in and say, hey, we're going to shut it down for the time being or for the foreseeable future until the problem's remedied. And we actually do have a representative here from the Dog Park Action Committee. If anybody has questions for Paula, or I should say Ms. Lockshire.
Property going to be monitored?
I know,
At
Paula,
all?
it's going to be under, you're going to have like a key fob. So you have to have your dog appropriately licensed. You'll get a key fob if you want to be able to go to the park. You'll go to the gate, enter your key fob. That's how you'll be able to enter the dog park. So there is a regulation.
I mean, as far as cleanup?
Cleanup it's going to be at the pet owners are responsible for cleanup.
Okay.
And so somebody from Public Works, from the Health Department is going to have to monitor regularly to make sure that it's being cleaned up.
Or they'll be fine?
Or we'll be hearing,
Yeah.
from pet owners that, hey, I was just at the park, looks like a disaster. We'll go inspect.
How is it monitored in terms of compliance? Who does that?
I honestly don't know. Paula, did that come up in any of me? Okay, great. So So there you go. Health
Say that
department.
again, I'm sorry.
The
Health department will be making regular
Well,
checks.
for example, through you, Mr. Chairman, if somebody comes up there with their dog in the dog park, excuse me, I'm assuming that's an off-leash situation.
Correct, once you're inside the fence.
What if they decide, I'm gonna go for a walk through the park, pull my dog off the leash? Is there somebody that's gonna be, because obviously there's gonna be a lot more dogs in Roosevelt Forest than.
All I could say is that's probably out of the purview of our department. I mean, if anybody wants to go to Roosevelt Forest right now with their dog off the leash, they can do that.
Yeah,
And who's gonna stop it?
well, the probability of more dogs seems to
Being
go
off
up.
leash and getting into the water course and pooping in the water course. It could happen.
Whatever. I don't know.
No,
I just
I
don't know if there was a particular way of, whether there's going to be somebody.
Did that come up in any of the meetings? Go ahead, Paul.
Yes, I was just going to say, the number of dogs that are off leash in Roosevelt Forest will probably actually decrease because animal control also will be monitoring the park more regularly. So they'll be there checking the dog park so they'll see, the rest of it.
But your organization doesn't have, you're not going to be looking at the dog park. You're just going to get it made and then that's it.
Oh, no, we're nonprofit. We're doing.
No, I know. But I mean, in terms of.
No, we're all residents, we're all volunteers. We'll be there with our dogs regularly. So we'll be monitoring the park.
That's good,
As well
good.
as additional issues, we'll escalate that.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I just want to ask, do we have any idea why the E. coli is already high in that area?
Well, I'm thinking it might be actually coming from Shelton. So Cemetery Pond Brook runs all the way from Shelton, and I know they actually have a dog park in their forest, which seems to be connected to Cemetery Pond Brook. So it could be coming from there. It could be the forest's native animals. Could be raccoons, deer, anything.
Geese.
Really. And there's actually different studies you can do to try and determine the source of the E. coli, but it requires like specific like genetic tests.
And as a physician, I'll tell you that E. coli is not a bad thing. It depends on which type of E. coli, et cetera. So, so there are commensals that make sense, that belong there. But if we're going to be thinking that we may actually shut them down, if there's E. coli, then we need to be really clear in terms of what is dangerous and what type of E. coli, and does it represent a real danger?
Well, one thing I will say is that the testing is done by DEEP on these water courses, and it's not regularly done. It's not like our beaches,
Again,
which are
we have 8
monitored,
billion
you know, like
fecal coliforms.
after every major storm event in the summer. It's not like that. They come out when they're able to, pretty much, and they measure the E. coli or bacterial levels in local water courses, and then at the end of the year put together a booklet on which water courses are impaired. And so it's not a very active sampling like we have for our beaches. So I'm honestly, we might see a spike in E. coli levels, but it could be from, 3 or 4 months
There's
ago.
a lot of other creatures out there.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, I mean, if we see anything that's like off the charts that would give us cause for concern, I might actually, what we could do, we could always hire a consultant and ask them to please monitor water quality for a couple weeks throughout the summer or something like that if things got bad. But in all likelihood, I don't see that happening. I just put it in there because I want to have us covered in case anything should come up. I'm good. Did you have any comments for us, or are you all set? Okay, then I'll work with you to finish up the administrative permit, and we'll be good.
Commissioners, forum?
Make a motion.
Motion to adjourn?
Just a point of interest.
Second.
So
Hold on.
with the first applicant, we had asked about what kind of remediation or what kind of plan they had around deconstruction, right? When they take down the old unit that's there and before they even start to build, and they didn't answer us at all. They walked around it.
And I'm thinking it might be best if we handle that. Well, why don't we discuss it at the next meeting? Because we don't have to make a decision. But one of the things we could do, if we were to approve the permit and we don't want to reopen the public hearing, we could make very specific conditions related to the demolition of the home and how we'd like to see it proceed to ensure that there's not going to any impact to the
And what I was thinking, the reason I wanted to bring it up now was that perhaps you can go back to them and say that the commission had a concern regarding that, and can you
But
present the plan?
Me and Bill just had an off-the-side conversation about it, and technically, we're not supposed to do that because the public hearing's been closed at this point. So everything we say is now off the record, which could get us into trouble.
Yeah,
So,
what we have to look into, Tina, is our ability for modification.
We can
Right.
stipulate.
Well, I think prior to even a permit, I think there may be some manipulation. You'd have to look into
We can go back with
the state regs in terms of our ability to approve and/or modify an application.
we could modify to,
We could stipulate, modify, we could do anything we want, basically.
Yeah.
And
I mean, that says that in our own regs, like, we can issue an approval with whatever modification we want.
Right. They can accept it
You
or
can
challenge it.
approve a permit and make modifications so that it's impossible for somebody to actually get the work done.
Right.
So in a sense, you're almost denying, like, that's how the regs are actually written. Not that we would do that, but we can decide on very specific conditions of demolition.
We probably should make that consideration in discussion.
oh, absolutely.
I agree.
And if deconstruction is anywhere in the exhibits or literature that they presented, we have the right to discuss it.
It wasn't in there.
Okay.
There was nothing addressed.
There was nothing in their presentation? No?
I mean, I didn't.
I
Okay.
didn't see anything.
I don't know. I didn't go line by line, but, no.
Oh,
Okay.
thank you.
All right.
This is mine.
Okay, we have a motion to adjourn. We have a second? I'll second. All in favor? Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Gosh.